There are moments in history when silence is not neutrality, it is surrender. When we choose not to speak, we allow cruelty to breathe freely. And when the suffering of an entire people is met with indifference, our silence becomes the loudest voice in the room. What is happening is not just a matter of politics or borders. It is the story of children who never wake from their sleep, of families torn apart at the dinner table, of lives lived under the constant shadow of fear. It is the story of a people who, despite everything, hold on to dignity, love, and hope. Justice is not selective. It does not wear one flag and ignore another. What is wrong in one corner of the world is wrong everywhere. If we cannot recognize the humanity of others simply because they live far from us, then we lose a part of our own humanity. The temptation is always there to look away, to pretend it's too complex, too distant, too far beyond our reach. But turning away does not make the horror vanish. It only deepens the wound. Every moment we avert our eyes, violence grows bolder, and the innocent are left more alone. To raise a voice may not end the suffering, it may not stop the bombs or heal the grief, but words can travel further than borders and louder than gunfire. They carry the weight of conscience. They remind the world that someone is listening, that someone cares enough to break the silence. And so the choice stands before us. Do we stand quiet and let injustice thrive, or do we summon the courage to speak even when our voices shake? I believe that every soul carries the responsibility to defend the dignity of another, to demand a future where no child is born into despair and no family fears for their survival, simply because of where they live. We may not hold the power to end the conflict with our hands, but with our voices we can refuse to let indifference win, and sometimes that refusal, that simple, unshakable refusal, is the first step toward justice. There comes a time when silence weighs more heavily than words. To remain quiet in the face of cruelty is to carry a burden that only grows heavier with every passing day. Silence may feel like safety, but in truth it is a prison, one that locks away our humanity and binds us to complicity. When we see injustice and choose not to speak, we become a shadow that lingers behind the suffering, present but unwilling to act. That weight does not disappear. It follows us, it lives with us. The suffering of others is not erased by our refusal to acknowledge it. A child crying in the dark does not stop crying because we cover our ears. A family torn apart by violence does not heal because we look the other way. Their pain continues, and in the silence of the world it echoes louder. Every moment we remain silent, that echo grows stronger until it is no longer their burden alone, but ours as well. There is a terrible comfort in silence. It tells us that by saying nothing we avoid conflict, that by holding our tongue we remain neutral. But there is no neutrality in the face of oppression. There is no middle ground when lives are stolen and dignity is stripped away. Silence is not peace, it is permission. It is the quiet nod to injustice, the unspoken consent that allows suffering to multiply unchecked. To break that silence is not easy. It demands courage. It demands the willingness to stand in the light, knowing that criticism will come, knowing that voices will rise against you. But courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else matters more. And what matters more is the life of an innocent child, the dignity of a mother, the right of a people to live free from terror and despair. The weight of silence crushes both the oppressed and the observer. For the oppressed, it is the confirmation that their cries fall on deaf ears. For the observer, it is the slow erosion of conscience, the steady decay of compassion. And so the only way to set down that weight is to speak, to give voice to the voiceless, to carry their truth into the world, to remind others that silence has a cost far greater than words ever will. At the heart of every conflict, beyond the headlines and the numbers, lies the human story. It is easy to speak in terms of statistics, to reduce lives to figures on a page, to say that thousands have been displaced or that hundreds have died. But each number was once a name. Each name belonged to a person who dreamed, who laughed, who had a favorite song, who was loved deeply by someone. When we forget this, we strip the tragedy of its soul. The human story is not written in the language of politics or military reports. It is written in the silence of a child staring at the rubble that used to be home. It is written in the tremor of a father's hands as he digs through debris searching for his family. It is written in the weary eyes of a mother who holds her baby close, whispering lullabies against the roar of distant explosions. These moments are not captured by statistics. They live in the small, fragile details of ordinary people enduring extraordinary pain. When we speak of what is happening, we must not forget that these are not faceless strangers in a faraway land. They are families who celebrate birthdays, who gather at the table to share meals, who tell stories before sleep. They are children who once ran freely through the streets, chasing each other with laughter that now seems like a memory from another lifetime. They are grandparents who carry memories of their youth, now watching their grandchildren grow up, surrounded by fear instead of hope. To see them only as victims is to diminish their humanity. They are not only defined by what has been taken from them, they are defined by their resilience, their courage to continue loving in a place where love is constantly tested. Their story is not only one of tragedy, but also of dignity. To endure, to stand tall when the world seems determined to break you, that is the kind of strength that deserves to be honored. If we allow ourselves to truly see them, not as statistics, but as people, then their suffering becomes impossible to ignore. Their story demands to be heard not because it is convenient, but because it is human. And once we recognize the humanity in their struggle, silence is no longer an option. To hear their story is to carry it, and to carry it is to speak it aloud, until the world remembers that behind every shattered wall and every tear-stained face, there is a life that matters. Justice is not a treasure to be hoarded by a chosen few, nor is it a privilege to be granted only when convenient. Justice is a truth that belongs to all, or it ceases to be justice at all. If it bends for one and not for another, if it is extended to some while denied to others, it loses its very meaning. The universality of justice is what gives it power, what makes it sacred, what makes it worth defending. What we see in one part of the world cannot be measured by a different scale than what we see in another. A child struck down by violence is not less of a tragedy because of where they were born. A family grieving the loss of their home does not suffer less because their flag is different. Pain has no nationality. Tears do not carry passports. Injustice, wherever it exists, wounds the conscience of us all. The danger lies in believing that justice can be selective, that we can choose whose suffering matters and whose suffering can be dismissed. Once we accept that idea, we open the door to hypocrisy, to a world where the powerful dictate whose humanity is acknowledged and whose humanity is ignored. That is not justice. That is cruelty masquerading as order. To uphold justice universally does not mean erasing differences. It means honoring the dignity of every life equally. It means refusing to look away when oppression thrives simply because it does not touch us personally. It means carrying the truth that what is wrong for one is wrong for all. The principles that we claim to value, freedom, safety, dignity, cannot be gifts we give sparingly. They must be rights that exist for every human being. When we defend justice for one people and deny it to another, we diminish our own integrity. We fracture the very foundation upon which peace is built. True justice does not draw borders around compassion. It demands that we stand with the oppressed, no matter their land, no matter their language, no matter their creed. For justice that is not universal is not justice at all. It is only silence dressed in the clothes of fairness. The greatest danger in the face of suffering is not always the cruelty of those who commit it, but the indifference of those who choose to look away. There is a comfort in telling ourselves that it is not our problem, that it is too far, too complicated, too tangled in history for us to untangle. But every time we avert our eyes, the cost of that silence grows heavier, and the wound it allows to deepen spreads far beyond the borders of the conflict itself. Looking away does not make the suffering disappear. It simply hides it from our sight. The bombs still fall. The cries still echo. The grief still consumes the hearts of families who have lost everything. Our refusal to see does not shield them. It only shields us from the discomfort of their reality. And in doing so, we give silent permission for the suffering to continue, as if our indifference is an agreement that nothing needs to change. History has shown us too many times what happens when the world looks away. Atrocities do not shrink in silence, they grow. Violence does not fade when ignored, it multiplies. Injustice does not crumble under indifference, it strengthens. By pretending not to see, we feed the very thing we claim to abhor. We grant it space to thrive, to spread, until its reach touches even those who once believed they were far removed from its consequences. The cost of looking away is not only paid by the victims, it is paid by all of us. It corrodes our conscience. It teaches us to value convenience over compassion, distance over duty. It turns us into spectators of tragedy rather than participants in justice. And when the world finally asks where we stood, silence will be our only answer, and silence that history will not forgive. To look away is to abandon the most basic duty of our humanity, to recognize the pain of others as our own. The cost of looking away is a debt written in lives lost, futures stolen, and a world that grows darker because too many chose not to see. A single voice may seem small against the roar of conflict, yet history reminds us that words have the power to cut through silence, to stir hearts, and to challenge the weight of oppression. The act of speaking is more than sound. It is a declaration that cruelty will not pass unnoticed, that those who suffer are not abandoned to the shadows. When one voice rises, it becomes harder for the world to pretend it does not hear. The power of voice lies not in its volume, but in its truth. A whisper spoken with conviction can travel further than 1,000 empty shouts. It can reach beyond walls, beyond borders, beyond the heavy machinery of war. It can carry hope to those who feel forgotten, reminding them that their struggle has not been erased. For those trapped in despair, the knowledge that someone, somewhere, dares to speak their name can be a lifeline stronger than steel. To speak out is not to solve every injustice. Words alone may not halt a bomb in midair or stop the advance of soldiers. But words are the seeds from which action grows. They awaken conscience, they stir courage, they force indifference to crack. A voice can rally others, and many voices together become impossible to ignore. What begins as a lone cry can swell into a chorus that shakes even the strongest walls of silence. Remaining silent may feel easier, safer, less costly, but the true cost is paid in the lives of those who are silenced by force and left without defenders. To raise a voice is to take a risk, but it is also to claim responsibility, to declare that injustice cannot stand unchallenged, even if the world does not change overnight. The refusal to be silent changes something vital. It denies cruelty the comfort of invisibility. The power of voice is not measured in immediate victories, but in its refusal to allow suffering to be forgotten. To speak is to light a candle in darkness, however small, and one candle can show the way for others. In that act, humanity reclaims its strength, and silence loses its hold. There comes a moment when every person must face the quiet truth of conscience. It is not the voice that shouts in public, but the one that whispers when the world grows still. It asks questions we would rather avoid, questions that pierce through excuses and reveal who we truly are. What do we stand for when others are stripped of dignity? What will we say when history asks where we were as injustice marched unchallenged? What do we say when history asked where we were as injustice marched unchallenged? The answers are not written by governments or leaders. They are written by each of us in the choices we make when we decide whether to act or to remain silent. The call to conscience is never convenient. It does not arrive when the cost is low or when the risks are absent. It arrives in the hardest moments, demanding courage when fear feels easier. To follow it is to step into discomfort, to bear criticism, to know that your voice may tremble, but that it must be heard. Conscience is the compass that points us toward humanity, even when the path is unclear, even when the road is heavy with obstacles. Each of us carries a duty larger than ourselves. To answer the call to conscience is to recognize that justice cannot be the burden of the oppressed alone. It must be the responsibility of all who claim to value human life. It is to demand a world where no child grows up beneath the shadow of war, where no family is condemned to grief because others chose indifference over compassion. History remembers those who stood with courage when silence was the easier road. And just as it remembers their strength, it also remembers the failure of those who turned away. The call to conscience is not about changing the entire world at once. It is about refusing to betray our own humanity. It is about declaring, through word and deed, that we will not allow cruelty to define the future. To answer that call is to take the side of dignity, of life, of hope. It is to choose humanity over fear, and in that choice to become part of the unbroken chain that bends the arc of history toward justice. And so we arrive at the truth that, as echoed through every word, silence is no longer possible. To remain quiet is to accept the suffering of others as though it were inevitable, as though their lives weigh less than ours. But we know better. We know that every human being carries the same right to dignity, the same right to safety, the same right to hope. The weight of silence is too heavy to bear. The human story, written in blood and tears, demands to be heard. Justice cannot belong to a chosen few. It must belong to all, or it ceases to exist. Looking away only strengthens the hand of cruelty, while the courage to speak breathes life into resistance. A single voice may not end the violence, but it can pierce the walls of indifference, and when joined by others, it can shake the foundations of injustice itself. The call to conscience has been made. It is not a question for tomorrow. It is the question for now. Will we stand aside and let history remember us as silent witnesses, or will we rise, however imperfectly, to declare that humanity cannot be divided, that peace cannot be denied, that every life deserves the chance to be lived in freedom? The choice is before us. And though the path is hard, though the cost is real, to answer that call is to reclaim what it means to be human, to speak, to act, to refuse indifference. That is how we honor the living, that is how we remember the lost, and that is how we build a world where justice does not ask permission to exist.